I guess we'll start with further development of the meter installation plan. See what this happens.
Wow.
And I know that Patrick has done a huge amount of work on analysis and whatnot.
A huge amount is generous. Mostly just banging my head against the wall with Excel and GIS, but what I was able to get from Tom is through Corey, who actually used to work for the PD. He's their GIS, and I don't know exactly what Corey does other than maintain their data systems, but he has a database of all their lead and copper rule inspections, which is actually another underperforming requirement of the DPW. And so why not combine two objectives into a single visit if you can. So what we have now is a merged data set of the properties that have been identified as non-metered and their status related to the copper and lead inspection. So what Tom and I essentially discussed was that if we're going to push forward with any sort of meter inspections and hookups, scheduling, whatever you want to call that effort, that requires a lot of people knocking on doors and putting leaflets on door handles and all that, you might as well do them both at the same time. You might as well do the copper and lead inspection and figure out how to get a meter installed. So now we have the truncated list of both outstanding copper and lead inspections and non-metered properties that we need to determine how to meter. So this data set is helpful because it provides a physical address, not a mailing address. The mailing addresses are virtually useless without spending another 6 hours banging your head against the computer trying to figure out what the mailing address means in terms of physical address. But we now have a physical address, we have their billing account number, their sequence number, which from what I understand, that's the actual serial number of the meter. Is that correct, Paul? Does that make sense?
No, because these guys don't have meters.
Oh yeah, okay, so what is sequence number? Have you figured that out?
I have not figured that out.
It does not make sense except for basically when you follow that by the account number, which is how it all comes out on the billing. It appears that the sequence number is about 10 off of the prior one.
Yeah,
That doesn't make any rational sense because we're missing accounts in between.
So I just have a question. Where's the information coming from? Is it coming out of NEMRIC or coming from some?
No, both. There's two sources. The sequence number and the account number are coming from NEMRIC, but everything else is coming from the lead and copper rule.
So I did the NEMRIC, he did the lead and copper.
Yeah.
So this is just what I know about systems like that. The fact is that, sometimes systems randomly assign a number as to how it's been put in. So like the system I work in assigns a customer number, it means absolutely nothing. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just how they went into the system. And if you're missing some, it could be that for whatever reason it doesn't exist.
That would make a lot of sense because all of these end in 0, which to me tells me that it leaves room for infill development.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's got to be something. It's either latitudinal or longitudinal arrangement in the city's system or something.
And then the fact that it's by tens.
It's by 10. You know that there's extra data points available if there's infill development. So either way, it's there because it seemed like an important number. So we kept it. But
and it doesn't relate at all to the span.
no, it does not. That's the other crucial thing is now we have the span, which was not available with other data sets, and the span is the parcel, for all intents and purposes, is the parcel ID. So when Paul or Tom are soliciting proposals from firms that do mass installs. Now they have at least partial data sets
Right.
to base their numbers on. We also can now, I've been having a hell of a time pulling this spreadsheet into a mapping format, which doesn't usually happen. There's something going on with the way the spreadsheet's formatted and how the columns are whatever you call it, numerical or text-based or whatever. Every time I try to bring in GIS, it will not recognize lat long as locations, but I'll figure that out. But essentially what that means is once I get that done is we can identify clusters in a neighborhood. And if we can target neighborhoods, then we can focus staff time to then go solicit for copper and lead inspections and meter scoping so that we can start to close loops on neighborhoods. I'm starting to agree with Tom that it's not worth all this proxy potential usage ideas that I came up with in regards to like number of baths or bedrooms or square footage or improvements value and all that crap. And if it really comes down to man hours, then we should be trying to do it in a hive, do it in a cluster, walk around and hit 20 addresses in the Fernwood Loop, or 40 addresses in, I don't know, whatever else. But once I can get this onto a map, then we can start to identify which clusters we want to tackle. And we might be able to determine whether, just by looking at, one of the more important pieces of information is like what we know the customer line material is, and if it's copper, and if it's a single resident unit, and if it's, pairs up with Frank's data that says it's just like a 2-bed house.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to prioritize that.
Yeah.
But if it's galvanized iron steel and there's a whole bunch of houses in this neighborhood that have never been metered, like, that's probably where we should focus our interviews. Because when I spent more time actually diving into the lead and copper rule than I did on this actual unmetered water hookups, because we are not alone in the struggles to finalize this program and meet the EPA regulations. The state, I don't know if I forwarded you the responses I got. I'm happy to do so if you're interested, but the state essentially said, Newport is by no means unique in the ghosting or refusal to access for doing these inspections. The feds do not require private landowners to allow access, period. But what that means is that we then have to document attempts. And I don't know if DPW is doing that. That alone is a Herculean task to track who you're pestering, how you're pestering them, how often you're doing it, and who's doing it. So I think if we can provide a roadmap with neighborhoods and addresses and spans and all that, and then get someone like New England Backflow to quote installs, we can start to chip away at neighborhoods, or at least do the whole citywide, and at least and establish contracts for not to exceed amounts, so that we can at least tackle portions of the city while we have the funds that we can somehow figure out where to get them from. But then we got to come up with a system. I don't know what Corey and Tom have for tracking their own efforts other than what I'm looking at right now, the lead and sewer.
My understanding is it's not tracked. One question I did have, when they gave you this information, did they mention how because the ones they've been into, they're taking pictures of?
Yes. So I asked Corey and I said, if we wanted to provide access to a third-party entity who's developing a proposal to do this work, can we share the photos from the specific properties? And he said, yes, they're cataloged by property. And so if a guy who was developing the proposal wanted to take a subset of properties and say, okay, we've got 700 properties, let's look at 70 of them,
Yep.
look at their pictures and see what we're up against,
Yep.
they could do that.
Okay,
And he
good.
could share that. So
Good.
that's available. The other thing that I will note is that there's more information in Corey's database than what you see here. That is truncated. So
Okay.
the lead service line data actually looks more like this, and it's got, I can't edit some of these columns, but it's got a lot more question, kind of qualitative data, you know,
Okay,
interior
yeah.
plumbing questions.
Yeah.
Well, most of it's empty.
Right.
The other thing is, which was a huge pain in the ass, is some of the, I don't know how they are inputting the E911 street address, whether it's an autofill from like a field form on a tablet, or whether they're just typing it in. But the way that I was able to merge these things is based on the shared E911 street address. And if there's so much as an extra space at the end of 43 Abenaki Drive, then those 43 Abenaki Drives from two spreadsheets will not pair.
They don't.
And so I had to go through the whole fucking list
Yeah.
and get rid of extra spaces or add extra spaces to get the spreadsheets to jive. So what that tells me is that our systems across the city are not actually
Talking.
one-to-one.
Right.
So my spreadsheet has fixed it, but I have. That does not mean that the sources of the data are still are actually fixed. So
I know when they're doing the lead and copper surveys, it's a clipboard with a paper form,
and then they gotta
and then I don't know who
do that
enters
to enter
Yeah.
it. And Corey's got 2 field tablets, so I think at this point they're doing it on a tablet,
Oh, that would be
and
good.
it's uploading to a spreadsheet, to a database which they can export as a spreadsheet. But it doesn't mean that it's cleaned up all the extra spaces and dashes,
Right.
which is kind of a nightmare to deal with.
And then we've got a problem also with any of the metered accounts. We have the gallons used and the price, but the gallons used are in, I don't know what format. You cannot get that column to add.
Oh, the 89, whatever that means.
All of the gallons used. If you want to double check that you've transferred things
I
correctly.
see. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I've melded all of those and changed them. Because what I did was I just did a formula that came out fairly close.
Yeah.
And then plugged it in. But yeah, the gallons are there, but you can't add them together. No. It's the weirdest thing. Yep.
Well, I noticed when you, like on this spreadsheet, it doesn't when you click on it in the box, it doesn't show it as a number. It shows it as a VLOOKUP.
So that's because it's referencing data from this table.
Okay.
So what I'm struggling with.
I see what you did.
So
Gotcha.
it's
That's
cross-referencing
yeah.
the address
Okay.
and then auto-populating
from this
from the
tab.
rest of the columns.
Okay.
So my problem is even when I copy from that tab
Yeah.
and open up a new spreadsheet and paste just the values, and so it erases the formula and then you're just looking at the
Yeah, just the
cell
raw-
value.
Yeah.
I still can the GIS still will not recognize lat long. So I have not figured out how to map these things, these data points
Yeah.
across the city. So I have not figured out yet how to identify like the hotspot clusters that we should be looking at. I'll figure it out, but the
Right.
VLOOKUP
It
is,
shouldn't be that difficult.
it shouldn't be this difficult, and it's for some reason it is borking the whole process. And I've used this whole upload a CSV file, reference the lat long columns,
Yep.
plot it on the map a million times, and I cannot figure out how to get it to register that the lat longs are numbers and not text. This is not relevant to anybody else,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it means that I'm struggling,
Yeah.
and I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
It's really weird when it looks like, everything's fine and then it just does not load.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is it's done by street name and then number. So 10 is followed by 100, which is followed by 1,000, then you have 2, and then you have 20, then you've got
Yeah.
200.
And
Why is
her,
that?
that's the way Nemrick does
Why is
it.
that?
So
Because it's the street name, as long as it's the same, will do it and it recognizes a 1, then it recognizes the next digit. It's the way it happens on spreadsheets.
It's how
Yeah.
spreadsheets do chronological order.
Yeah.
Unless you have 5 zeros and then a 1, 1 is before, or 1,000 is before 1.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. 4 zeros. Unless you have 3 zeros and a 1, 1 is not first, 1,000 is first, 1's way down the bottom. And it's just,
That's not quite how NIMRIC's doing it, but
Okay.
it literally is it's 1 followed by however many digits. It's 2 followed by how many? So 25 is followed by 200, and then basically
Yeah, that's what-
35 is down with the 3s. So it doesn't make, it's the first digit.
The other-
And all the other ones afterwards.
The
It's
other
just like
curveball-
alphabetical, yeah.
The other curveball is the City of Newport Utility Building Report goes street and then number.
Yeah, that's
Which-
what I was talking.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah,
Oh, well, I thought, because there's that, and then there's also the fact that 1 does not actually land at the top of the list.
one doesn't.
There's two problems there. There's two problems there.
and
So,
then there are numbers that are longer than other ones that sort by number
And-
somewhere else,
and then
which is
some of
their
them have these-
account numbers.
and then some of them have these stupid little parentheses affixed to the end of the address that says mobile home. And that throws everything off.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
dash apartments throws everything off.
That luckily has not affected what I've done, but yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of it is just like how none of our systems talk to each other.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of data manipulation. I've had a lot less than Patrick's had to.
And it's scary because the more you manipulate, unless you're keeping detailed notes, you cannot recreate it.
Right.
Yes. And I have the problem that I downloaded, it happened to be the residential water. And I'm looking at the bottom when you sort it by use, because you know how many people are using what number of gallons. There was 100,000 gallons for a place on the bluffs that didn't have a sewer. Now this is 1/4. And I'm going, and I happen to know that's a single family residence. I happen to know there's only one person who's there. When I double
Drinking
check,
a lot of water.
but when I double checked downstairs on what the bill was, they were billed $50, which would relate that something is wrong. And also it can't do 1 million, so you're sitting there, that's right next to, and the big sort, if it was also the industrial, right next to Columbia Forest Products with 1 billion gallons, okay. So yeah, it's quirky. But somehow my sheet went off and I don't know where.
So can I ask a big picture question?
Yeah.
I'll describe later in the meeting where I think we're going to have to land in terms of going to the voters for a special election. But I think the timing's likely going to be midsummer. I kind of hope to put it off till fall, and I don't think we can. So it doesn't sound to me like we're going to be ready to include any kind of a financing proposal to match a meter installation project. We're going to have to wait on that until, maybe even until March of next year, and warn it with the regular special election to get authority to borrow enough. Like, that's where my head goes, right? How are we gonna, what has to happen? And it sounds to me like you're talking about probably a matter of several months, not weeks, to try and get us to the point where we can even understand the data.
So I agree. I think the caveat is that Tom has suggested that by mid-July, Causeway and water tower project will be done, in which case he can start peeling man hours off of other projects and start training up people to start doing.
To actually go out and do the visits.
He says he's diverting energy from those projects once they're wrapping up to the lead and copper rule, because that is something that they're going to start getting fined if
Yes,
they don't do
absolutely.
it. And so if they're doing lead and copper
They
rule,
might as well do the meter
They might as well do the meter inspection and potentially install in the easy ones. And so we might be able to start chipping away at that. And if we can tell Tom where to focus his energies based on what we have now for information, then we will be able to tease those clusters of town out from what we have to put out to bid,
So, based
in
on,
theory.
right. I mean, I would say, based on, we have some information. I think we have enough that we could potentially have some, not the whole system,
Yep.
but a part of the system
Yep.
ready to go to bid. And I'm gonna reach out, I'm gonna set up a meeting with Thai Sales and New England Backflow, and just,
Okay, so this helps me because maybe what it means is that instead of pressing as hard and fast as I can on the vote, once the city council warns that we have to hold the election within 30 to 60 days, that's our window.
Yep.
And I was assuming we should just press and do it in 30, but maybe we ought to plan for the vote to be, mid-August, mid to late August, and buy ourselves 2-3 more weeks. We have to warn, if I understand this correctly, Pam and Ann, you may actually, or John, you may know this better than I do, but I think I have to warn the actual language on the ballot about 10 days in advance? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
I think it has to go in the warning itself.
I think so.
But yeah, that's what I mean, but it has to be warned officially, like 10 days out. The council can call for an election, put it on the schedule, and then I don't know if it's 30 days out or 10 days out. There's some number in there where we have to actually warn it, and at that point we have to have the language. And I thought it might be as little as 10 days. And if that's the case, then if we put this vote, the special election vote off until the end of the 60-day period, it would buy us 8 weeks from now, 6 weeks from, when we would, we'd warn it right at the end of June, and then we could hold that election middle to end of August.
So a little, assuming that,
Yeah?
and assuming we can get the meters, I'm not sure how quickly we can start metering, but two things. One is, how do we address the people who've been on the list for ages or claim they've been on the list for ages? And number two, how do we get these people to put meters in if they don't want to?
Well, once we have the meters, it's a different question, right? At that point, it becomes a question of how we enforce the
Which all
requirements.
falls under ordinance.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the only way to do it is a fat surcharge.
I think that's right.
It's the only way to do it. There's
we also
no
need a
there's
council
no
vote
precedent.
mandate.
But there's no precedent at the EPA. There's no precedent at the state. From what Tom explained to me, he can go and spend 2 hours shutting off a property, and he's going to get a call within 45 minutes from the state, and going to go spend another hour turning it back on. It's just going to be a waste of time and money.
just so, and I've got to research that because in 28 years of shutting people off, the state has never been called, and we were never called by the state. So I don't understand how that,
We should make sure we have good information.
right, let's make sure we have good information. I mean, we don't have it in our ordinance, so they're in the right, because we don't
Sure.
have.
We don't have an
There's
ordinance
no
for that.
rules saying otherwise.
Right, exactly. And the state does, as part of everything Tom has to provide to them, does have a copy of our ordinance. I can't believe that they actually know what our ordinance says.
Okay, but just to go back to, we don't have to dwell on this. I'm just trying to
Right.
get into my head,
Right.
what might be impacting the decision on how to warn this election.
Yeah.
And I think, Jennifer, that if we have the election the second half of August sometime, it's going to take another period of time
Yes.
to actually work out all the details on loans, right? We're not actually going to have money in our hands until at least the end of September, is my suspicion. Right, so we're not gonna buy all this stuff and begin doing installs until fall anyway. But the problem is, if we don't try and do it this summer, then that whole process doesn't even begin, unless we warn yet another special election sometime late in the fall, which we could do. That's not, it costs us a few $1,000. It's not the end of the world. We could do one more, And maybe, honestly, I'm really asking this question, maybe this is just too fast and we should go ahead, warn this election fairly quickly and deal just with the overall financial picture. And then take our time, make sure we really fully understand what's going on, and when we think we've got the numbers under control, warn another election sometime later in the year to deal with just the water meter problem.
My thought is that in the next 2 weeks, we will have more information to base a better decision on. I really think that from a contractor standpoint, it's not going to take that long.
Okay.
And you never know, they might tell us that we can get to you in January.
Right.
We don't know that either.
Okay, so I will not put anything on the agenda for the council meeting this week about warning the election. I'm going to hold off till the July 7th meeting to warn that election and buy us a few weeks to have more information so we can make a decision at that point about whether
I
the
think
water and
that's-
sewer stuff should be included.
And then
think
find
that's
out
fair.
the true timeframe.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that's what I needed to know tonight.
Are you talking about voting on funds for water meters?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's the only, everything else we do have to warn.
Right.
If we warn it on the 7th of July, it means we can hold that election probably be the second week of August. Or we could hold it as late as the second week of September, basically.
But remember, putting in meters in a simplistic way for me is you can put a meter in tomorrow, and you can put another meter in another 3 days, and you could put another meter in 3 days. And in the budget already, under sewer, is that we're going to spend X amount of money on meters. So we have money now to buy meters, maybe 50 meters, maybe less. But anyway, you
How much was it? Do you remember, Paul?
Yep, I know.
It was,
$500
Was it
bucks.
50?
For,
Yeah, but all the meters got moved to water.
yes.
right, there's 50,000 in there.
That's what I thought.
So you
So
can
you're
buy-
right, that would buy, according to Tom's numbers, if I read them correctly, you'll
Well,
have.
I've got the updated numbers right here.
That would be about
That's 2 meters per
120,
$1,000.
120
Somewhere.
meters.
Be about 100 probably.
Right here.
100 meters, okay. And you've got labor, because, Tom was capable over the first 7 or so years in bits and pieces of putting in about 700 or 800 meters, or maybe up to 1,000 meters over that period of time. So there's a capability, if you say to somebody, this is a priority, it means you shift some of the things that you do till later, or you shift them a day or two out. But meters wind up on the agenda for doing the job.
Yep.
And if you can get, however many meters more you get done, is however many meters more you're not paying a larger fee.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I got your point. So, Paul, how many meters can we buy for 50 grand?
100.
That's with his old, I haven't compared his old numbers to the current.
They're all about $500 a piece.
Yeah. And then
Well,
gotta
did you
realize
add in
your
all the
scenario's gonna be
parts?
off because
Well,
lots too big
these are all different
for
sizes.
lots of times
Right,
it was
but this
just
is gonna be the
installed.
bulk of them
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
And we had
And
four
then you
cheaper at the
need,
plant and then down to
But you
3.
can use one of the summer people, or you
Yeah.
can
But
use
again,
one
this
of
is
your
just,
other
this is just
people.
materials. This isn't labor.
Yeah, but you
Right.
can't have just anybody
didn't
going in and
quote-
I'm
cutting.
sorry?
You can't have just
There's no
anybody
miscellaneous
going in
parts. I
and
think
cutting
it's-
pipes
You
and
need
putting.
They were supposed to put that one.
I'm sorry. You
I
need
thought
one,
he said that the
one
corn
person
is
who-
included in these.
Hold on. It doesn't matter. That question honestly makes no difference tonight. So let's not go there. That's an actuation.
Corn's like $80.
But valid point. We have the money for the meters.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Tom seems to imply that
But the installing costs 2 salaries though, right? Tom identified 2 people need to go in.
Probably 2 people.
2 people will be factored into that.
What were you going to say, Patrick?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
And And if you're having difficulty figuring out what to do in terms of who to go to, let's take care of some of those people who were on the list that disappeared. And
Make
who will-
those our priority this summer.
and who will be willing to have meters in. You don't have to worry about an ordinance or anything like that.
I think that's a very savvy point.
We can do, provided no unforeseen things.
Yeah, because we know it's a
No.
perfect world.
Forward installation.
If it's a straightforward installation, we can do 90 meters in a year. We can purchase 90 meters.
At 50 grand.
At 50 grand.
All right. So Ann's point is well taken, unless you two think I'd love to hear a technical reason why that's not a valid point. That maybe one thing we do is we prioritize the summer cleaning up anybody who thinks they put themselves on a list.
I can't help but wonder if those people have been vetted and deemed not an easy install.
No, they haven't. And
No.
How do you know that?
well, one, I have a crystal ball, but two, that a lot of people contacted the city as they were asked to do. They were not vetted. They disappeared into the swamp where nobody answers the phone. They disappeared into voicemail. Stacy did at one point write down a list of names. I know they weren't vetted.
And
I have friends that have.
one of them's sitting right here.
No contact.
So
And do we have that list that Stacy tried to create?
Who knows?
So-
Okay, all right.
Jason supposedly has a list.
Okay, that's good to know. What were you gonna say, Paul?
So, and I understand what you're saying, and I'm kind of on board with you, except for some exceptions. So we have their regular job list that they have to do. Plus, if anybody read the consumer confidence reports that came out, we have system deficiencies that have been unaddressed since 2017 that need to be addressed. So I don't think we're off the hook for not utilizing some sort of help to get meters in.
Because the highest priority for our staff
Is going to be addressing
is going to be
deficiencies.
addressing those deficiencies because
Right.
we're out of compliance.
Right.
That's very helpful information too.
What do you mean by deficiencies?
So we have, though, there's a couple, did I? Yeah, I did. So since 2017, we have had a inadequate cross connection control in one of our booster pump stations. That's going to need to be addressed. So there's some sort, I can't say what, but there is some sort of a cross connection in there where the system has a potential bringing in unsanitary water. The other one in 2019, which I believe, in the bits and pieces I've heard from Tom, may be getting addressed with the tank, is inadequate water pressure under normal peak and maximum flows. So that's an issue. And the other thing that we gotta work,
Does it say whether that's east side or west side?
That was the east side, and it was allegedly going to be addressed by the new water tower. That was one of the
Yeah, okay,
justifications
so,
for putting it in.
so that one may just get taken care of in the next month.
right. And the other thing is that we're gonna, at some point, there's gonna have to be more added to the work list because we are showing that we have disinfection byproducts over by the hospital, which means the guys are gonna have to get into a regular flushing program to bring fresh water over there so that the system, so your disinfectant byproducts are coming from water being in the system too long.
Oh, that's what happens, okay.
So they're gonna have to get on a routine of flushing to draw fresh water over
Because there's just
there.
not enough demand that's flushing, that's bringing the water through the system, is that what's going on?
It's that, or it's a choke down system. There's a couple different things it could be. I mean,
What is this
It
for,
could be an
bacterial?
So disinfection byproducts are a byproduct of
Chlorine.
chlorination. So the longer water sits,
Yeah.
the more it generates those disinfection byproducts,
Okay.
which,
So you're saying the service line is essentially too much volume for the demand.
correct. It looks like the line over there is too big for the demand on it, so it's acting like a reservoir instead of like a water main.
Yeah. It's a really
But-
fat garden hose.
I haven't had a chance to talk to Tom about it, so please.
Next volunteer thing we're gonna need from you, Paul, is to just go over there once a week with a big fat fire hose.
So, I mean, like, the last thing we need to do is be flushing our lines and just dumping perfectly treated water out and paying per gallon and not being able to charge anybody for it.
Right.
That's a good point.
So, what are the alternatives? Is there some sort of treatment that will reduce the production of byproducts?
I haven't seen a system map. I don't know how the system is looped. Maybe it's just redirecting water in a different manner so that
It flows more.
it's forced to flow more to get there. As long as you're not creating pressure issues.
Gosh.
I mean, there's a bunch of
Okay.
not a bunch,
So
but
if
there's
I
some
could just
stuff.
restate your global point here.
Yes.
What you're saying is, while it may seem like the best way to solve one of our meter installation problems is to divert energy this summer from staff
Yeah.
into doing those installs, there may be higher priorities that the city has to take on.
There may be. So I'm throwing that out as a caution because maybe it's only 2 days of dedicated time to fix that cross connection
Yes.
issue. Maybe it's only
But we have to prioritize.
yeah.
Got it.
It just, I mean, if I didn't know what I knew about water systems, I would, a layperson that actually took the time to read this and said, well, our system's been deficient for 8 years. What are they using my money for?
Right.
You know?
Right, we need to be compliant.
Right.
That seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Is it cheaper, I'm sorry, is it cheaper to pay an outsider to do some of those tasks than for them to install all the water meters? Or where's the,
Right.
cost?
I would answer that if I knew what the task was. At this point, I just know there's a deficiency. When I find out what it is, I'll be happy to answer that question for you.
Well, the other piece of this is, it really doesn't matter when we use the 50,000, because we could incorporate that 50,000 into paying this other company while our people are doing stuff like this. We will have that 50,000.
That's true.
So
That's
whether
another
we
way to
spend
spend
it
it.
now or spend it in the larger, I definitely agree with Ann. I know people that would love a meter, 2 years ago, but at this point, we'd have 50,000. We can spend it this summer, but as you said, if there's higher priority things, we still have it, whether it's now or October or December.
Do you have a reason for thinking that these people, quote, were vetted?
Only because my own personal experience. I called the sewer department, they came by, they inspected it, they said, this is an easy install, we'll be back in an hour. And they came and they installed it and it was 25 minutes done. So if people have called Jason and asked for it, and unless he either just got distracted and wasn't able to follow up, or
Did you call Jason or the city?
I called Jason.
That's
Because
But how would
that's
anybody know to call Jason?
everybody.
Tom just told me to call Jason. That's all. That's the only reason.
So I hear what you're saying, Pam.
That's
Right, if they called the city, it's quite possible they fell into kind of a dark hole.
It's more than possible. It
It
happened. It's happened for
happened. Every
years.
person I know that calls.
I got you. I got you.
Well,
So,
it's time to move on.
yes, I want to move us on, but I want to go back now. I actually want to restate differently the conclusion I came to a couple of minutes ago, because hearing all of this, I'm actually now inclined, unless you all try and talk me out of it, to go ahead and warn the special election this coming Monday night. Because the financial issues are in fact timely, and the difference could be the matter of weeks that it could take to arrange loans following a bond election could really make a difference to us. So I don't want to wait even 2.5 weeks until we have more information. I think we make this decision, we figure out how we're going to prioritize the $50,000 and the other things that have to be done. We work all that out, and when we're ready, I am not afraid of calling yet another election, if we have to deal with the water and sewer stuff.
Makes sense.
So I'll go ahead and put it on this week's
Yep.
agenda to warn a
Wouldn't
special
necessarily
election.
say bond unless you've talked to the bond bank people and know.
The language is bonding. I mean, it's authority.
process.
Bonding is authority to borrow. It doesn't mean you have to go to the bond bank to do it.
It's authority to borrow for more than a year.
That's right. That's what we're talking about here. So all we have to do this week is say, we intend to hold an election and put a date on it. And I'd like to set that date. If we do it this week on the 16th, there's no reason we can't set that date for the last week of July. That's about 5.5 weeks out. And then we've got the month of August to try and get our act together and arrange any loans we've been approved for, which is going to matter when you look at our cash flow documents.
The only thing is the time frame that you do have. Are you gonna have enough time if you set the date? Or are you just gonna say you're gonna,
No, we do have enough time. We have a path forward now. That document that I sent you all this week
okay.
that shows the cash flow certificate lays out the strategy for the order in which we need to go after these loans. For the first time, the day before yesterday, I felt like I actually could understand the trick that it's going to take us to get to the end result we need here, the pathway.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't quite follow the order of operations for this warning and bond voting and approval, or how you even come. I mean, I looked at your spreadsheet, it was shockingly simple, and I trust the numbers because they're scarily large. But I just want to make it obvious that I don't really understand all of that.
So I'll just say, I agree with you. I've been trying for months to get to a detailed cash flow document, and I also was shocked that that's not actually what the bank was looking for. What the bank wanted was our best estimate of how cash is going to come in and go out of our primary operating account, which covers all three of our funds, both enterprise funds and the general operating fund. And they want something we are confident enough that our treasurer will put his name on. And so I have some detail in that. Jim and I have been able to go through, and we've compared it both to how spending worked last year and how budgeting is planned for this coming year to get to those numbers. But if you asked me to drill down and go, 2 or 3 layers down in one of those numbers, I couldn't do it at this point.
We know, like, salary and benefits, we've been able to come up with that kind of a close estimate of like a per month for salary and benefits, but anything else is, it's all just general spending. It's all just, and what comes in and out. And so I know that's pretty broad, but I think salary and benefits were something like $315,000 a month or something. There was some number, 300 and something thousand a month for salaries and benefits. And then everything else is everything else. And I had to get to the place where I could actually wrap my head around everything is in one account. And that was my hard thing. But everything just comes in and out of the same checking account. Jesus. Police, fire, everything, everybody.
Right, because, and this is actually Chip's primary point that he was making with the Finance Committee, we've been trying in a half-assed way to do accounting by bank account, to have all these pockets of bank accounts. And what Chip is saying is it's an inappropriate way to budget and do finance and do our finances on a number of levels, in part because it segregates money that can help us with cash flow. Right, and in part because it's just confusing as hell to kind of try and keep 15 or 18 or 20 bank accounts straight, when all of that should be able to happen on a spreadsheet as a matter of what's owed and what fund is owed what. That's the point that he's been trying to get us to. And I'm in a different place now than I was 2.5 months ago. I absolutely came into this thinking we have to have a designated account for every single thing. So we will, Monday night, we'll go over these numbers as, with as much detail and care as we can and let folks know kind of how we came to the conclusions we came.
Okay.
All right, that's what I needed from this part of the conversation. And I just want to say, I mean, you're telling me all kinds of things I didn't really understand about how we're going to get to the both. I'm glad to hear of the combination of the water meter and the lead inspection, because that makes total sense.
It was a curveball to me that, just like hearing from you that we're non-compliant in a bunch of different operational, metrics. It's like, Jesus Christ, where do we focus our energies when you have a staff of 1.5 guys that are free to go and do anything?
Yeah.
None of which are master plumbers or anything.
Right.
So,
But each one's you gotta have a certain one ready to go for this. You can't, the efficiency's gotta be fixed, the logistics of it.
Yeah, I think Paul's point is well taken. That's got to be a high priority.
Okay, unless there's anything else on that, I'm just going to ask if there's any follow-up on the Derby issue. If not, we can take that off the agenda going forward.
Are you talking about the
village
billing for the sewer?
Yeah.
Yes, that's taken care of. The bill was submitted 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now. Frank did most of the calculating on it. He based it on the formula that you gave him, John. He was able to correlate it pretty darn closely to what Becky did last year. And we turned that bill in, and they've already made one of the payments, and we expect to have full payment on that. I think it was roughly 120 grand by the end of July. So that one is dealt with and off the table now.
So,
Yeah, and I saw where the village had sent a statement of flows. Was that to back up the billing we just did, or is that in anticipation of the next billing?
They do that, they should be doing that on a regular basis.
Oh, okay.
And it just becomes part of our documentation process, and then it becomes part of the billing every quarter, I think it is, or something.
so the only thing left on that topic then is to confirm that the way it's been being billed is the way that the agreement says it is to be billed.
Doesn't it get trued up at the audit time?
I'm not ready to commit to that statement. But what I can say is that Frank was using the formula that John came up with.
Right, and that's
I was given that by either Tom or Jim. They found it somewhere in the paperwork.
In any case, I think we've done the best job we can do at this time.
right. But what I'm saying is, at some point, we need to take that form. Somebody has to take that formula, take the Derby contract, and say, yes, this formula matches how we're supposed to be billing them. That has not been done yet. We just build them the historical way they have always been built.
historical meaning the last 12 years from what we can recreate.
I could be wrong, and it's worth asking the question, maybe having Frank in the room for this. But I think the answer is no. Actually, Frank has gone back and looked at the historical.
No,
No,
that's
because
not
when
true.
Frank was here,
Frank is using Karen's spreadsheet, which is
Correct.
not corroborated perfectly with the contract from the 80s.
Okay, then we do have to go back.
Yeah.
I'll take
so
your
we
word
just
for it.
have to, we've got to figure that out, because to do that, we have to continue doing sampling up at Netto's Plumbing.
Yes, understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then there was the other question as to whether the definitions, whether all the expenses were actually being picked up.
Correct.
In the definitions.
Right. Yeah. So there's a chunk before next year, before the next billing goes out, there's a lot that has to be figured out with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But we can slide that to the back burner for right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we are billing Derby something and it's consistent with the last few years, we can't really do anything until we
Right.
understand how much a gallon of water costs. And we're not gonna know that until August,
Got it.
right? More or less.
Yeah, we'll see, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Did they finalize with Derby yet? Cut the tie?
No,
Sometime in July,
July.
hopefully.
no, but we are prepared to make that's gonna change some billing adjustments on water usage too, right? Because we're gonna stop paying Derby for the people on the, what is that, the south side of the road. And Derby's gonna start paying us for businesses on the north side of the road. What else is up? Go ahead.
I was just going to say the next is water ordinance revisions and update.
How's that go?
Oh, I'm almost done.
Well, I started looking at the enforcement provisions, disconnection and all of that, and collection for delinquencies. Then I realized the tax sale statutes have been substantially rewritten in the last couple of years since the days when I used to do them. And generally speaking, the rewrites are not biased towards the municipalities. They're biased the other way around in the sense that it's become a more difficult process, more hoops to jump through in order to enforce. And so our ordinance probably looks like it needs some fine tuning to bring it into compliance with what the current statutes actually are. In terms of actually trying to draft anything, I haven't gotten to that point yet.
So, for my part, I've been doing a lot of cleanup, making it more usable at this point while I'm processing things. I will say that probably by the time I'm done, our 30-page ordinance will probably be approaching 60 pages. The part of that reason is that the city, from what I'm seeing in here, and there's let me say there's nothing wrong with this. A lot of cities do this way. They use their ordinance and their system specifications, they turn them into one document. So here's our ordinance for water, but along with that, here's our specifications for hydrants, for valves, for whatever. That would,
Which is their substitute for like a code, like a city, like a code,
right,
a water.
right, exactly. So, which is fine, except it's the way it was written is very vague. So I need to work with Tom and Jason on, okay, what do you really want for fire hydrants? You just can't say you're going to put a fire hydrant here and then, you know, are your valves open right or open left? Are they butterfly valves or gate valves? Stuff like that needs to be clarified in here. So it's going to grow that way. There's some cleanup that needs to be in here on the thawing of frozen water lines and stuff. There's also stuff in the water ordinance where they, which I've got to get from Tom when he's back, but they reference a separate backfill policy. A backfill policy really needs to be in the ordinance. It needs to be solidly in the ordinance. So I'm right now I'm focusing on the technical stuff. The one. I'm glad this isn't up on the screen. The one thing I did find was a pretty interesting statement that the city would not guarantee the purity and potability of the water supplied. That's coming out of the ordinance.
I'm betting it was like drafted in 1907
So
because horses might have pooped in that corner or something, right? Like,
there's
Or somebody knew that there's a bunch of lead water lines everywhere.
right. I mean, obviously with all the water supply rule and stuff, I mean, we're responsible for it up to their curb stop. You know, if they've got lead in their house, it's on them. It's not on us. So just there's a bunch of old school oddball things that need to be cleaned up. But once I get through that, then hopefully John has had some time to think more about the legalities of shutting people off, putting liens. We'll start to incorporate that. And then I'm thinking as a group, there's a section in here about funding. I don't think we need to talk about it right now, but I think at some point we need to talk about, does that belong in the water ordinance, or does that belong in a greater city ordinance on how public works is funded? I mean, obviously it should only be funded on the money it takes in from its bills, but it does talk about sinking / capital reserve funds and stuff like that, which will need to be updated because we know we can do up to 15%. So, so I've started.
right, because we would just follow the state statute language there.
Right, we'd follow the state statute language there, exactly. I have started, but this is no small undertaking, so.
I honestly thought that this was more in your court.
The technical side is not.
Okay,
believe me.
so you're doing like
Believe me when I say to you.
you're doing like the code expectations for system build out or requirements, and
That-
you might be advising on more enforcement.
Some of the other parts of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
There were two comments that I wanted to make. One is that there's another, and I can't remember if it's an ordinance or if it's just specifications, but there's a document that's BA thick, which is nothing but technical specifications for public works, and I think it includes some water and sewer items. We had it when we were on the planning commission
Okay.
because we were trying to cross-reference some of this road-related specifications with the zoning. But when you mentioned, what brought it to mind was when you mentioned the right turn versus the left turn for the
Right.
valves of
Yeah.
the fire hydrants.
Yeah,
Because that actually makes a significant difference, because the fire department has everything set up for turning one way and not the other.
yeah,
And if you throw in an outlier, a fire hydrant,
Yeah.
then they're stuck.
It's useless.
That's exactly right. It's completely useless.
yeah.
And in any event, I have a copy of that. I'll try to find it.
Yeah.
I can scan that and send it to you too. I think it's 100 and some pages.
Yeah, yeah, that would be helpful
Because
because
if it overlaps this or is inconsistent with this, then in terms of technical, the question for Tom is which ordinance needs to prevail and where do the standards really need to be?
right.
The other thing that jumped out at me in reading this ordinance is that you really can't read it without having a set of the Vermont statutes with you, because everything cross-references and says, read this or read that or
Yeah.
read the other thing.
Yeah.
And it
Should have an
It
appendix.
should be much more self-contained
Yeah.
from the usability point of view
Yeah.
than it is.
Yeah, and that was one of the first things that I started tweaking was to use from a usability standpoint, and that is one of my thoughts exactly. Anytime it references something, it should be in an appendix, so that it doesn't drag things out when you're trying to research something. You know, and if there is a specification, I guess that's something that well, we'll find out from Tom when he gets back, but that's something that in the absence of a city manager, does the city council want to have a say in that stuff? Or does the ordinance just reference the city specification? And then when we have a city manager, the city manager just worries about the specification with the department heads. I mean, I have a bit of hesitation with that.
Are you asking how an ordinance gets approved?
No, how a specification, like a water system specification.
I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that because we don't have any specifications for anything.
Right.
We don't have building
Well, it sounds
codes.
like we may.
Well, there is this one document, and theoretically, anybody who creates a new subdivision is supposed to be guided by the parameters in that document in terms of a lot of the technical detail. And it does require that the Public Works Director or his designee supervise certain and inspect certain aspects of construction.
Because that
So, Paul, are you going to are you leading us toward a recommendation that we create two documents? One is ordinance and the other is specifications? Or are you thinking they're all going to be combined, as you said, that happens in a lot of other places?
So, I guess I would have to, before I am willing to answer that, I want to see what he's talking about. Because if it's already established.
Yes, then we just follow that pattern.
Right, except the ordinance would say who has the right to change the specifications and when they can change them. Instead of listing out the specifications, the ordinance would be detailed on any new work has to follow these specifications. Anything, you know, see this, 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 and this. But it would also detail how those specifications can be updated and changed. I mean, I'm gonna pick on Tom because he's not here, but you can't have a sales rep show up, take Tom to an expensive lunch, and then Tom comes in the next day and changes his valve specifications,
Right.
you know?
Right.
There has to be some sort of a checks and balance so that things aren't willy-nilly getting changed, right?
Yes.
So that's what I'm grappling with right now, and until I see this document, I don't really know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we had some conversations a couple of years ago, a couple of planning commission meetings that Tom came to the effect that there were some parts of that other document that did need to be updated.
Yeah.
So,
I can't remember the details off
I'm
the
sorry,
top of my
Jeff.
head.
No, I'm just wondering, obviously an ordinance, you don't change that often.
Right.
Specifications, I don't know whether they are treated the same as ordinance. So it would seem to me that the ordinance should refer to the specifications that might be easier to change, sort of like policies and procedures to bylaws. But I don't really know, obviously you don't want to do it at a whim, but, you know, do you want to go through the 90 days or more for an ordinance change if suddenly you have in there a valve that has been discontinued and you have no option?
Well,
You know, so I just, you know.
Right. Well, a specification should never call out a manufacturer.
Well, no, that was sort of, you know, something
Yeah.
that happened where you get a change.
Right,
yeah.
so,
Because you
I
said
see what you're saying.
municipalities, you said
Right.
do it both ways, and I'm just sitting there thinking, what is the better way?
right, but at a minimum, if there are two separate documents, which I wouldn't have a problem with, the ordinance needs to establish who has
Yeah.
the authority
Yeah.
to change the
And
specification.
my question goes back several minutes. So
Gotcha.
it's not,
Right, right.
it's not now, it was when you started.
Yeah,
you know, of just thinking about that, of which way you want to go.
Right.
And also thinking about federal regulations that obviously we have regulations that we have learned to live with from the
Right.
EPA that suddenly have just gotten tossed out the window.
Blown out of the water.
Right.
So, you know, we don't know, at some point they're going to possibly come back, or maybe they won't, or.
You know, right, and I mean, it would make, real quick, just because I'm not gonna stake my life on this comment because it just popped into my head, but at first blush, I can see the city manager and department heads requesting to the council a change with an explanation of why the change, and then the specifications could be changed by a vote of the council versus, you know,
An ordinance
Yeah.
change.
an ordinance change.
Yeah,
Makes sense, especially if this document proves out to be
yeah.
kind of a specification already.
Yeah.
But water and sewer specifications, I believe, well, they could be part of a larger specification, I guess. I was thinking separate.
I think
But-
either way.
Yeah, it really
The
doesn't.
other honest thing is, how many times have you ever checked, you know, check here if you want to, you know, use your online banking? Who reads that?
Right.
You know, and I think maybe if you have an ordinance, I'm thinking, okay, 30 pages, maybe
Yeah.
somebody will read, 60 pages, you know, you'll be lucky if, you know, major construction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Well-
just, you know, I don't know, will they refer to the specs?
Well, I mean, it becomes part of the permitting process.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether it's ordinance or specs, it becomes part of the permitting process for building.
Yeah.
So can I ask one other big question before we move on from this? Because I'm just trying to understand the political dimensions of it. Can somebody more experienced than me in the room help me understand, what does it take to actually change an ordinance? Like, when you get done drafting this, do we send it, we have to send it for legal
It's
review?
the same process that we're going through with the zoning.
Okay, so it goes for review, it comes back, it gets reviewed by a subcommittee if we have one, it goes to council for review, there's a public forum or two mixed in there, and then council finally makes the vote, right? We don't need a vote,
Yes,
you know, a public vote. We
right.
don't need a
And then,
special election vote, right?
correct, and then there's the procedure for people to potentially overturn it by petition, just
Over the
like
following 2
with
months.
the
or whatever.
zoning or speeding or anything else. All the ordinances
Okay.
have that backstop.
All right, so a best case scenario is that we're looking at probably 9 months to a year to complete the ordinance review.
Yeah, it's not going to be fast, I can guarantee you that.
Okay.
And
Whereas,
is it something where we do this in phases, where we do an ordinance review just to give the water department more authority, and then we come back with this more revised, polished, code-based
Good question.
ordinance? Because I don't see how we can start levying surcharges without doing something in the next 3 months.
right. We need a way to develop a stick to get people to.
I figured it out. Now we have a map, and the clusters are very obvious. It's the bluffs facing north.
Yeah.
It's the Sias Ave and associated neighborhoods, and it's everything west of. Proudy. The neighborhood west of Proudy Bay is half unmetered.
Yeah.
So like, unless we start, going heavy with the ordinance change that allows, surcharges based on refusal for entry, it doesn't mean that you're going to get surcharged for not having a meter, but you're going to get surcharged if you don't allow entry.
You're not cooperative.
If you're not cooperative, right?
The
And
assessment menu, certain. is that
No,
what
it'd just be
you're talking
one charge. If
Just
you,
one
if you
charge.
refuse entry,
for whatever, whether it's lead and copper or whether it's metering,
doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. But because the state was clear that there's no federal requirement that they have to let you inside. So it sounds like it's going to take a while for the 60-page revision to be.
Not really. If this is a true specification, the ordinance will get shorter
Just copy paste.
and it will be done a lot
It's like a
faster, and then we can focus on the specifications.
Then we do the ordinance quick and relatively quickly. Takes
Correct.
3 months and not 9 or 10 months,
Correct.
right?
Right.
We do the ordinance with the appropriate reviews,
Right.
and then we've got the appropriate mechanism in place to say, if you're not cooperating, here, there is a resulting consequence.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just
so we just need to come back to that next
Yeah.
week.
I do just want to, state that we can come up with all these sorts of like policies and enforcement and, like penalties or whatever, but ultimately it comes down to downstairs. Someone's got to issue that.
Right.
DPW's got to issue a warning. If they don't get a response, they've got to call Stacy or Jim. Stacy and Jim's got to put an asterisk on that account. They got to surcharge them. They got to keep tabs of that. They got to deal with it. So like this is more than just,
Yes, there's an
enacting.
internal process that's got to be
Yeah,
developed.
and
They've gotta
I
make sure
don't
the
think
capacity.
they're equipped for it, to be perfectly honest.
I
the
don't
moment
think
they're
you're gonna
not.
assign someone specific to that duty, that task.
Well, the likelihood is that what happens is, as we build up the administrative staff upstairs here, it becomes their responsibility to do the enforcement side of it, and all they're doing downstairs is tracking information. I mean, that's been the history anyway.
Yeah.
For the most part, that office downstairs doesn't, delinquent taxes are not the obligation downstairs, right? They're an obligation upstairs here with Frank at the moment.
Okay.
But you're not wrong. As we create this, it would be extremely helpful to say, here's what the process is going to be, and here's what the staff
Yeah,
capacity is going to
because
have to be in order to make it so.
It's the same thing I run into with all of these permits that I have to deal with every day at work. It's like, you can write these fucking rules, but who's going to actually follow them
Yep.
and enforce them and make sure that
That's right.
that
If
the
there's no
reports-
enforcement, why bother?
Why bother, And so at the end of the day, we might as well just blanket charge everybody, because it might cost the city less to do that than it is to keep track of all the people who don't actually want to pay.
Understood.
So it's like, we can try to do this as equitably as possible, but ultimately it's going to burden the taxpayer more if we try to get too finely tuned to it.
Understood.
So just something.
I don't
to
think we
keep
can
in
make that judgment yet, but
No, we can't,
I
yeah.
understand your point.
Patrick, have you looked into the legality of
Nope.
surcharge?
mind. I haven't looked into the legalities of anything. I'm not the person to ask for that. Yeah, no. But I think from talking to the folks at the drinking water division, they said that you can't force access upon anything, but nobody has indicated that if an ordinance says you must oblige, and if you don't, a penalty will be levied. I don't think, that doesn't sound that unusual to me. HOAs have worse
Right.
agreements than that. Like they'll literally tax sale your house if you don't mow your lawn. I don't think that's
John Ward said that was a past practice too, wasn't it?
the tax sales. Yeah, but again, how much administrative time does that require?
Right. And it's a 1.5 to 2 year long project.
Right.
Right, and tax sales historically have been how they've enforced it. They added in, and they never actually, going way back, they never added the water and sewer into tax sales. That only started within the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah,
Just for
I think-
property
I think
tax.
John started it.
Yeah.
If there was a tax sale, they added the water and sewer on.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've ever had one purely for water and sewer.
No, it's always done as an add-on, because the economics of doing a tax sale are difficult because the fee structure has not been adjusted in decades. And that's one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to find attorneys in Vermont who will do tax sales, because the fee structure is so ridiculously low that you lose your shirt doing it. And a lot of towns don't want to appropriate any money to spend out of their general legal fee budget to subsidize it, so it ends up being a pretty non-lucrative process.
This is like a little bit of an aside, but can you just educate me a little bit on how a tax sale works?
Well, the way they historically worked is that in theory, once the taxes were delinquent for even a day, you could start the tax sale process. The rules are much more complex now. They have to be at least a year delinquent. You have to have provided opportunities for payment plans and so on. But the basic mechanics of it boil down to the tax collector sets a date,
There's an auction.
you essentially have to do current owner title searches to figure out all of the liens against the property. You have to give notice of the sale date to the property owner and all lien holders. So if somebody has a first mortgage, a home equity loan, and an IRS lien and a child support lien, you've got 5 notices to send for that one property. And people have an opportunity to redeem from the tax, or pay to stop the tax sale, literally up to the moment it begins. So if your property is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow, you can walk in at 10 and pay it off before the auction starts.
So does, and the delinquent fee does not have to even get anywhere close to the value of the property? Right. It becomes essentially an additional lien on the property?
Well, what happens what happens if the property is sold at a tax sale is this. The tax sale buyer acquires the right to either get their money back with interest at 12% per annum, unless the town has voted to do some other things that just complicate this. As long as that payment is made within a year after the date of the sale, or failing that, they buy the property free and clear of the property owner and all of the liens. In other words, all the lien holders are foreclosed out by the sale. Jesus. So that's why
So the bank loses out?
Well, right, that's why your bank mortgage says that you have an obligation to pay property taxes.
Wow.
And even if you're making your mortgage payments, if you fail to pay your property taxes or homeowner's insurance, for instance, you're in default of your mortgage. HOA fees the same.
So everything you just told me suggests that we do not want to go down that road for
That's right.
anybody delinquent. Like, that sounds like a disaster.
Doing it the way they do it now, which is piggybacking it onto tax sales, piggybacking the water and sewer charges onto tax sales makes perfect sense. But the tax sale process is becoming more and more cumbersome. The ultimate protection to the city, to the municipality, is that the property tax lien is a super first position lien. It supersedes even a first mortgage. So property taxes get paid first
Before the bank gets paid.
before the bank gets paid.
Does it exceed the IRS?
Yes.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah, and the IRS just gets in line with everybody else.
okay.
So if you have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, and a child support lien, and then the IRS comes along and records a lien, they're in 4th place. 5th if you count the property taxes.
Jesus.
And-
This is bankruptcy court.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It can be.
Yeah. So then we definitely want to
We
go
don't want to be
down.
on this road.
We want to be the
It's-
levies,
yeah.
the surcharge.
It's not an easy process, and it's much harder now because of some of these changes that I've just started researching in terms of notices. And you actually have to send a notice now translated into the
Certified mail, I'm sure.
yes. Well, it's even worse than that. And you have to send a notice now, or certain notices, in the 5 most commonly used languages in Vermont,
Oh.
other than English. I didn't know that until
So that's 6
today.
languages.
I came across that one. And the Vermont Department of Taxes conveniently offers a service where they provide the translation for you.
Isn't that handy?
So,
Tax sales are really nice for the people who buy the property.
yeah, no,
I did once, and
I've
it was
always
a great
heard
savings
that.
account for about 8 months. but-
Yeah, well, but there's another complication that comes in, which is that
you create an absolute enemy of your tenant or parcel owner.
well, that's beside the point. That's assumed.
Oh, yeah.
But the other complication is that if you sell the property for substantially less than it's worth, then you run into other issues in terms of equity. And property owners can actually undo tax sales in that situation in bankruptcy in some circumstances. And then
I regret asking you this question.
Anyway,
So I'm watching the time. I got a couple of things. Is there anything else on your list, John?
no.
Thank you
no,
for the
I think we've beaten tax sales
All
to
right.
death.
So I just want to review so I make sure that we're all on the same page. I've got at least 7 items that remain priorities for this group. And I just want to go, many of which we've talked about tonight. I won't belabor them. At least one of which I suspect is new to y'all that I want to put on your list. So one is the finance team is in the process of recommending that one of the things we will ask for permission to get a loan for is to satisfy a due to others line on the balance sheet of the sewer budget of roughly $1 million. And that due to others is due to the general fund, right?
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is asking for permission to borrow $1 million that will satisfy that obligation, so the balance sheet will be clear for the sewer budget, and then move it so that we've got cash to operate with in the general fund. That means that that portion of the new debt that we're going to be taking on here is going to have to be a matter of a rate adjustment.
Yeah, picked up by the sewer department.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to think about that rate adjustment probably by sometime toward the end of August. We're going to have to be thinking about what that means. We clearly won't have enough time to do it by the July 1st, I think it is, deadline, or August 1st, I think it is. But I just wanted you to be aware that that's coming. The second one that you should be aware is coming is the new one I want to put on you, which is I found out this week that in order for us to, well, I'll go back and say what I think you all know, but I just want to be sure. I was operating under the remarkably naive assumption that because we, the community, had approved a bond for the water tower of $5 million minus whatever grants were taken in, that it was just going to be a fairly simple matter to say to the bond bank, the Vermont Bond Bank, hey, we want to be included in your next bond pool, which was going to be August. Except that when I said that out loud, they barely contained their chortling and said, we don't know what you're talking about. We've never had a conversation about this. And there's paperwork, and it's like any other loan. You've got to satisfy us as a lender that the city's good for it. So you're not going to get it in August. A best case scenario is you come to us in December for the bond pool that would be released in, I think it's April of 2026. So the earliest we're going to be able to do this would be if we had all our ducks in a row in December to get that money by then. And we have a different problem, which is that by October we will have nearly or totally maxed out a $2.4 million construction line of credit to build the water tower, and that comes due in October. So I was assuming that the Vermont Bond Bank would be lined up so that it could pay that obligation off. But in fact, that's not going to be possible. So we're going to have to borrow from a commercial lender on a short-term basis, probably a year, to be sure we've got enough time, in anticipation of the bond income that we're going to borrow.
Are they going to allow you to bond on it?
We have to bond on it. Yeah. If we, that's the assumption. But in order to get there,
there was a glitch with.
The glitch is we haven't done any. They didn't know about it, and we haven't done any
I thought there
paperwork.
was one more glitch, which was something to do with it was already under construction.
No, I don't think so. That's about money that might have been available, and I think it was only like $250,000 on this
Okay,
project.
all right.
Had we done our homework years ago, we could have gotten money out of the Water Conservation Board or something from the
Okay,
state.
all right.
So that's not. I don't think that. Although I could wake up tomorrow and discover I'm wrong, because this happens to me almost every day. But my latest understanding is we should be able to jump through the hoops.
Right.
One of the hoops we will have to jump through by December, I'm going to ask you all to help me with, which is they're going to want, because they know about our history, they're going to want a 5-year cash flow projection for the water budget in order to justify the Vermont Bond Bank's bond for us. So we have to start working on that, so that by the time it rolls around, we can.
I mean, 3 years, but 5?
That's what they told me last week.
That's what they said.
5 years.
Yeah, I believe
That's
that.
only on the water.
I think it's only on water. Is that your understanding, Lori? I don't think it's going to be water and sewer.
It might just be water, but it's everything.
Well-
I mean, we have to do a general fund.
Yeah, it will take looking at the whole fund. But I think what they're obsessing about, obviously, is, I mean, the whole point here is the water budget should be able to pay for it. right? We're not
Yeah.
we're not taking this money out of the general operating budget.
Right, that's right.
We're taking it out of the water budget. So that, I just wanted to put that on your radar. I'll know more shortly, because I keep talking with these guys about every 2 weeks now. But they warned us that we should be thinking ahead about that, because it's going to be an issue.
So when's this, December?
I'm thinking that it's early December that we would have to have all of our paperwork lined up and be ready to go. And I suspect we'll work with them all fall to make sure that what we're submitting is in fact up to snuff.
So this is in addition to the $1 million from sewer to general fund?
Yep.
Which is $555 per hookup to cover that $1 million
Yes.
shift. So over the course of maybe 1 year, each household is going to have $555 in additional sewer fees to cover that $1 million.
No. I'm assuming we're going to bond that. We're going to arrange that loan for a minimum of 10 years. So that money's going to get. That's the whole point of going to get a loan. If we don't get, here's
What are we
another.
talking about for percentages, though?
I don't know, 5-6%, whatever, right? Like over 10 years, if we spread that obligation out, I'm thinking it's what's going to make it palatable. Because I just learned this, according to the charter, if I understand it correctly, if we do not get voter permission to borrow and spread that debt out over time, the alternative is we raise the rates immediately enough to cover it within a year.
Yeah, which is $130
Right. So the voters, at the end of the day, no reasonable person is going to say, "Yeah, hit me for another $550." Right? I want it this year.
Just come in the office and write a check.
I guess I'm the fucking outlier, because I'd rather not have this city to extend another line of interest.
I understand, but most people can't bear that kind of hit. That's the problem.
Yeah, no, I get it.
If everybody that could did, that.
I mean, think about how long it took us to get into this mess, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take us some time to get out. So that's what I know about that.
I just worry that for every additional complexity that we layer on top, we're going to have less and less certainty as to what the hell the bottom line looks like.
It's true.
It's true.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you, Patrick.
That's where and I'm looking at some of these estimated receipts, and I'm like, we got 2 months where we aren't even breaking 6 digits in income in this city, which is pitiful. That's terrifying to think that we have a order of magnitude discrepancy between expenses and receipts for a 2-month period.
Yeah, well, what you're going to have to figure out. I mean, the only way to solve for that problem is to start billing for
Or
property
assets.
tax.
What does the city got? Do we got vacant land that we sell? I mean, like that. Nobody's asked that question yet.
No, that's not true. Some people are asking that question.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of asset that this city's sitting on that it would make sense for us to sell.
No.
The assets that you're talking about are legacy assets that we want to protect for this city, right? Whether it's the marina or the Prouty Beach complex, right? Like you tell me where there's more assets that this city's sitting on that we could use to try and finance this, because I don't see it.
And let me just add a couple things. First of all, they also want to know that the enterprise funds are awash.
Are solvent.
That are solvent every year. So what we already know is that we may be increasing, we may have to increase these fees once or twice a year. And because we have to be able to cover it, we just have to. And that's what they said, that's what they're looking for. And to speak to the question about income, it was also mentioned that we might have to just go to 4 times a year taxes instead of 2 times a year taxes. And that was another way to spread, but it's still the same income. It's still the same income. It's just spread more throughout the year.
Less of an
Now, does
impact at
anybody
once.
remember when we got 4% if we paid our total tax bill by November? Because it literally was due in November. We split it.
4%.
4% if you
Discount.
paid, you got a discount of 4%. If you paid
no
your
kidding.
tax bill in full before November,
No, we had
it was
money
due
there.
in December. Yeah, that was one of the changes
Anyway,
back in the 80s. Yeah,
there are a lot of bottom lines here.
yeah.
But the most important bottom line is we are working to get to the point where these funds are solvent and they're not deficit spending. And that's the only way we're going to dig out. And in the long run, if you'll forgive the soapbox moment, the only way we're going to relieve the pressure, the financial pressure on ratepayers and taxpayers in this community is by creating greater density in a landlocked community. There's nothing to sell, there's nothing else to do. So when we get 400 new units of housing in our downtown, right, that's gonna be the thing that will be, or commercial or whatever you talk about, as long as we're putting taxable properties on the grand list. Now, even that is a delayed gratification, right? We know that that tax boost isn't gonna hit us for probably 15 to 20 years because of the tax increment financing necessary to build the infrastructure to get that stuff built in the first place. So yeah, there's risk in every step of this project, but I don't see any other way that we're going to resolve the fundamental problems here.
So,
And the request, as I see it, in the request for the bonds, I mean, the fact is those numbers are up to like 9 million, which is really scary. But when you have to spread it out, and it's to correct all of the debt, right? Am I right in that?
Yeah, well, and let's be clear. If you add up all the debt on that cash flow certificate I sent you all, it comes up to 9 million plus, right?
Yep.
A third of that, in very rough terms, has already been approved by the voters.
Yes.
For a fire truck and a water tower, right? More than a third of it. Another third of it, or a little less, is cash flow. It's 2.6 or 2.725 million dollars that we're looking for to just make sure we have cash flow going through the year, right? And the last third is the accumulated deficit that we've been talking about for months, which at the moment we're saying $1 million of is going to come from the sewer budget.
how much is the other?
Right. And the other 1.8 is going to satisfy the general fund obligation. So that's another $2.8 million
And
there.
what's the water tower costing us? What is not funded by grants?
The best guess at the moment is $3 million, of which we're going to owe 2.4 on the line of credit in October, or maybe a little less if they come in as under budget as we hope.
So we got 0.6, which is just fluff in there.
I think 0.6 is actually the 600,000 is what you're talking about, the difference between 2.4 and 3 million?
Yeah.
No, I think that's money that likely actually got spent in this process that effectively is part of the overall deficit of the city. Money that, I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess.
Okay.
It's, so it is in fact daunting and overwhelming, but you just got to kind of take it one chunk at a time, I think. And then as long as we're not deficit spending and digging the hole deeper every year, there's a path out.
I think
I
that
can't. Go ahead.
going to the voters with as many requests with regard to loans as we would be going to them with, and with the proviso that generally our taxpayers have been pretty generous about saying yes, 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 yes.
Yes, they have.
But usually it's only one at a time. I think there's going to have to be a real education curve, either through putting it into the warning somehow and explaining what is happening and why this was needed, or if you can't do it in the warning, explaining it in advance, because it's a lot to take in.
You are absolutely right. It's gonna, if we agree to do a special election the last week of July, we're going to spend the month of July doing education, and that education absolutely should include the simplest, clearest possible way of describing it in the warning that we possibly can come up with. But it's going to include public forum, it's going to include all the media things that we can do to try and get the word out. And honestly, we've been educating for 3 months here, two months since we started these, 10 weeks now, right? The reason we've done all of this with as much transparency as we have is because we have to be able to justify the conclusions we're coming to. Mm-hmm. That's why we've done it this way.
Yeah, but they may also need an explanation of how could this possibly have happened.
They will need an explanation.
Well, we'll give them an explanation, but I'm not going to do it with finger pointing. I'm happy to say, honestly, just be clear, I am happy to say to the public, we went 8 years with a $500,000 a year deficit in the water and sewer on paper and never raise the rates to match it. That's a statement of fact. People can draw their own conclusions.
Brief summary.
I am happy to find simple language to describe the budgeting error that's been made since 2018 that's added up to roughly $1 million plus in our balance sheet deficit because of double counting revenue coming from the state, right? We can describe those things, and I'm not opposed to doing it.
And they approved a fire truck, they approved the water truck.
That's right. Those decisions were made
Those are already.
previously, and they're done.
Yeah.
We're taking a fire truck, no matter what. Okay, so here are the last things. The consumer report responses that we've already talked about. Rewriting the ordinance we've already talked about. The water meter questions we've talked about. And then the last two are somewhere in here. Once we get a plan for how we're dealing with the water meters, remember, we got to go back and rewrite a rate schedule. Right? We got to figure out what the rationale that Jennifer's going to help us figure out the clearest path toward.
But we can't do that till the next quarter.
I think that's right. I don't think we can mess with that now.
Right. So,
And then the last one is what we said we can put off for a little bit, which is how we manage the billing for the Village of Derby.
so what, in terms of like the meter plan, what are you looking for from us? Like, are you looking for another 1 to 3 page recommendations with, you know, an explanation of how we came to these conclusions and where we think where and how meter installation should be prioritized, and whatever Paul digs up with his vendors?
Yep.
And funding?
And I would add one more piece to that, which is, what do you recommend we do, this team, what do you recommend we do with the $50,000 in the budget for this year, for the fiscal year 25-26? How should we prioritize that money in this process?
Well, I mean, that was inherent in the, how do we go about tackling unmetered properties, right? Because that's the only budget we have to work with.
Correct.
Right? So it's just like, how far can $50,000 get us?
Well, no, but for me, it became far more complicated tonight, right? Because there are questions in there about what's the highest priority for our staff this summer. Are we going to do we take that $50,000 and put it toward a contract with somebody? Or do we take our staff off of other things and put them on this and buy meters with it? There are questions in that, I think, that are substantive. And the council's going to need some rationale for how we decide that.
Honestly, to avoid kickback, I would almost say, if we're going to spend that $50,000 on meters, we find the list and do the people on the list. They might be they're the low-hanging fruit. They're the people who have been asking. They're probably the people who are going to kick back and say, I'm not going to vote for this when I can't get a meter.
I don't disagree with any of that, except I want to make sure that Paul's question is answered, which is the compliance issues have got to be the highest priority. So if we can do both, have at it. That's my answer.
I mean, is there any reality at all that we'll find this list?
We can certainly resurrect some of the names by simply asking.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
we
that's-
could
I guess
just put
that's
out a
where I was
community call
going
and
with
say, if you have ever called and asked for a meter inspection and not gotten it, please, contact this number or send us an email or whatever.
And potentially it's a few of the people on the 11
Might got a board too.
So these, I mean, yes, these have to happen, but like, what are we actually going to do? Who is going to do what? Like, are we going to call Stacy, or am I going to call Jason? Like, how are we going to do this? Because we talked about this a couple times now, about this mysterious list, and it's kind of irritating me at this point because it doesn't exist. Let's just acknowledge it.
Who's going to take responsibility?
It's in a waste paper basket at this point.
So I think we double check and make sure that's the case.
Yeah.
And then
So
go
Jennifer,
out
would you
and
be willing to do
make
that?
You sure? I mean,
Great.
Yeah.
If
I was
you
gonna
can check
give it
with
to
Stacy.
Carl.
I was going to offer it. Yeah, sure. Give it to Carl.
Yeah, all right.
Well, that sounds fine to
Do
me.
you want to check with Stacy and Jason and try to see if there's any sort of list of people who have called for a vendor or a meter?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And then
Because if you
there
get a
isn't-
list, I can cross-check with this, and we can start to figure out like this neighborhood right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if there isn't, I think we make up a new email address at newportvermont.org called, I want a water meter or whatever, right?
Water meter hotline.
And we do a social media campaign and news campaign and say, if you have ever done it and you want it, sign here. If you have ever wanted it but never asked, if you want one now, we'd like to know that.
I mean, I'll be honest, we have that. It's called the Newport Water Department at gmail.com. We have
There
an
we go.
email
Okay,
for
great.
that. That goes straight to Corey. Corey's the copper and
Beautiful.
lead guy.
Yeah,
So like we just
That's email.
we need to
So
start
we put
recreating this
Corey in
list.
charge.
yeah.
And he runs their GIS. He seems like he knows how to keep track of things.
It would
So-
be great if the committee got a copy of it on a monthly basis. Right.
Or even a shared Google Drive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know. So I'll just email that.
Great.
I'll email him right now and say Carl, I'll loop you in because
Yep, thank you.
Rick, what was the fifth thing? I'm sorry.
I had, 5th was water meters, 6th was new rate schedules, and 7th was billing for Village of Derby, which is on the lowest part of my list at this point. I don't think we need to talk about that for a few minutes.
There's something to throw out there. We can flow estimated based on what we have for known meters and plugging in the new rates. If we change the rate schedule significantly, it's going to change those figures possibly significantly and throw a cash flow off.
Yep, we're gonna have to pay attention to that.
So, yeah.
There was at least one night this week where I went to bed thinking about that problem.
Yeah, so, I'm wondering whether, people who sat there and said, potentially, do we have to change the rate schedule before we put in the new meters? Before we get it all metered? I think that's the thing to think about.
Well, let's find out, what are we talking about here to get the meters
Yeah.
done?
And
I feel like I just flying
can flow the
blind.
divisions that, the utilization, because I think
And that
that's
was just act for me to this, right?
Okay.
Because I couldn't quite hear you, Jennifer, but
I think.
were you talking about as the meters are installed, our usage is our money's gonna drop?
I know.
Yeah.
And so, that's the big question. You
Right.
can ballpark for that if we know going forward.
Right.
And just do a percentage based on what we've got for
Yeah.
value. If we change the rate schedule, it depends on how we do it. It might throw all of those figures off, and do we have the figures enough? We might going forward. But if they want 5-year cash flow now, it's got to be sort of conditional on, some base assumptions.
And then, 2 or 3 years down the road, you're gonna be saying, we're producing this much, we're billing for this much, where's the rest of the water going?
That's right,
And you've
yeah.
got a whole nother budget issue with.
That's right. If we aren't on our game, we're back in a deficit again.
Looking at the figures I've seen and what I know from before, we have considerable loss.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
There could be some really, really high-end users, but unless we find, even the apartment buildings, you look historically, some of those apartment buildings, most of the unmetered they're two apartments.
Yeah.
I think there are 10 or so that are 3 apartments, and that's the max.
Yeah.
So nobody that we have sitting out there is going to be really a high user, a known high user.
Yeah.
I mean, we got somewhere, I think, we need to contact some of the people. A single person with using 10,000 gallons, that's probably very high for them. Yeah.
Okay, can we quit?
I think we've covered it for tonight.
Exhausted ourselves in the subject.
One dead horse.
How's that horse looking?
Thank you all.
Next meeting.
Oh yeah, next meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's a good
Good
question.
point.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, sir. May I have another clue?
Can we say that with enthusiasm?
I got that.
Yeah.
Let me shine the light on.
How does Wednesday, the 25th work?
June, I won't be here.
It works for
I'm
me.
gone that whole week actually,
Okay.
but
Tentatively do, please.
I might be able to zoom in. I don't want to hold this group up because the likelihood that we'll have 800 people sign up for meters by then is pretty slim.
No, so we could just go ahead that night.
Yeah, I've suggested the Wednesday only because I have a conflict on the 26th.
Okay.
Okay.
That Wednesday's perfect for me because I have nothing else on the.
Okay, PM, does that work for you? Great.
Okay. 6:30?
6:30 on Wednesday the 25th, and I'm going to change that on the calendar right now for the city.